Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans podcast starts right now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the New Orleans Pelicans podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. We are continuing with our player profiles, and I think you're going to enjoy this one. Mr. Jim Eichenhofer, Pelicans.com, as you've been joining us throughout the season and after the season, of course. Antonio Daniels, you might have heard of him. Very high energy, very knowledgeable, just always fun. It's a downer, though, Jim, knowing that we only have like 30 minutes with AD, you know. I could do like 3 hours with AD. In all honesty, for people that don't get the opportunity to know him and talk to him like we sort of do, you know, off the air and off the mic, that's that guy, right? I mean, like what you see on the screen, that's him, always full of life and energy.
You said you could do 3 hours. I think he definitely could do 3 hours as well.
Does. Well,
he
we
loves
both
to
have
talk.
shows. Yeah.
I enjoy the fact that he's very self-aware, too. I've heard him say many times in the past, he'll be like, you know, I know I'm not for everyone. I talk a lot. I'm very boisterous,
Yes.
and that kind of thing. But yeah, we love it. We love Antonio.
Maybe that's why I get along with him, because my wife always says, do you ever listen or you just talk? And to which I tell her, well, dear, for 14 years I had a talk show for 3 hours a day.
You know, we have in the past we have said about certain broadcasters that will remain nameless. I've jokingly said to a PR person who doesn't work here anymore but works for another NBA team, we jokingly say they don't pay him to listen. So it reminds me exactly of what you just said.
I like that. I'm going to write this down real quick.
They pay you to talk. They don't pay you to listen. The money doesn't come in from listening.
Next time, Mrs. Kaysen, pay me to talk.
They say they don't pay me to listen.
I love it. We're going to talk about point guards with Antonio Daniels. Jose Alvarado and Dejounte Murray are the two players that he's going to talk in his versions of the player profiles. Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. I sort of feel like one of the storylines for the Pelicans over the last several years, since Zion's been here as well, when you had Brandon Ingram, CJB, man, turnovers, execution late, clutch time, all things that a quote-unquote true point guard would help with. I think we talked about that a lot the last couple seasons going into this season. This past offseason, the Pels make the move, right? They go and get Dejounte Murray in a trade. Bring him in. That he is a true point guard. We get to Nashville, day one of training camp. Jim, you're with us. And I think it took 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? And then especially after that first scrimmage, I feel bad for you. You probably had bruised ribs. Graf is elbowing you on one side. I'm elbowing you on the other side. I'm smacking the top of your knee because there's an alley-oop. There's a give and go. There's a screen play. We're like, so that's what a real point guard looks like, right?
Yeah.
And then the second unit is led by Jose Alvarado. And he and James Borrego, they weren't there to let the starters win, right, Jim? I mean, kind of take us back to what led into that offseason when it started into training camp and your first impression of seeing that first scrimmage, those first practices with those 2 point guards.
Yeah, I mean, I think you went into the season saying that point guard is going to be a huge strength for this team, that now you have 2 guys that you can fill all 48 minutes with players that play a lot like true point guards, kind of the pass first guys, the guys that are going to get a ton of assists and make sure that everyone gets involved in the offense. I do think that Dejounte and Jose both have shown their ability to score, but we thought going into the season on paper that this is going to be great because you're going to have these guys all season. Unfortunately, Dejounte only played 30 games, 31, and Jose played 50 plus. So, I mean, combined, they barely got to 82 games played. So it was just one of those things that was just you thought that things were going to go a certain way, and obviously injuries prevented that from happening. But, you mentioned how we've had the discussion over the years, and obviously I've been here the entire time. And I remember I've heard this so many times, the Pelicans need to play better in the clutch. And it was something that just with the eye test, before you even look at any stats, any data, you realize, like, okay, this team has had problems executing at the end of games. I think almost every NBA team, if they're decent, you'll hear fans complain like, hey, these 6 games we should have won. If we had won these games earlier in the season, we would have had a better record. We'd have a higher seed. We probably would have advanced in the playoffs. But it's the kind of thing where it's like you never mention the games that you won that were close. So sometimes I think you overstate it. But it's interesting when I went back and looked at the clutch time records of the Pelicans over this last bunch of years. It's not an exaggeration at all to say that that's been a massively costly part of the game. So this season, obviously, they end up finishing 14-20 in clutch time, but you didn't have Dejounte for a huge chunk of the season. You didn't have Jose also for a huge portion of the season. But the thing that's amazing to me and blows my mind when I look at it, they've actually had a losing record in clutch time every season all the way back until 27-18 was the last time that they had a winning record. And I think people remember that playoff run from 2018 where Rajon Rondo was the starting point guard. They moved Drew Holiday to shooting guard, which I think is something that he was a lot more comfortable playing. And if you look at his career since then, it's been the same way, that he's been better as a 2 guard. But they went 30-20 in clutch time in 27-18, and every season since then they've had a losing record. I think the worst record during that stretch in clutch time was the 2019-20 season, which was Zion's rookie year, also the year that ended in the bubble in Orlando. They were only 13-28 that year. So, I mean, and really there's only been a couple years even since when they've been close to 500 in clutch time. So over and over again, we've seen this over the last bunch of years where they needed to be better at executing at the end of games. They needed to make sure that they had better possessions. They needed to reduce the number of times where you have like a 6-8 point lead with 3 minutes left and you don't close the game. I feel like that's something that I know people are probably wincing when they hear me say that, and they're also picturing different games where they had, especially on the road, where they had a lead where you're like, okay, they only need to make one more play and this thing is over, and they couldn't do it. So just going back to the point guard thing, that was the area that I thought that they could make a huge difference in. And I didn't even realize that it was a streak, but end the drought of how many years in a row that they finished with a losing record in clutch time. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and I think that you could definitely draw a direct line to the fact that they didn't have the point guards on the floor that much.
I was going to say it's a direct correlation, right? To Are you a playoff team? Are you a competitive team? Are you? I mean, those teams do that, right? When off the top of my head here, we don't need to go long on this, but the teams that won 60 games this year, right? In Cleveland, OKC, the Boston stuff. What do they do late?
Yeah,
I mean they finish, right? Play defense on that last possession or two, make it tough for you to score, and then more importantly, they're clutch and score. They can inbound the ball, Jim. You know, I mean,
very
important.
And
a lot of those things. When I think of the lack of clutch winning in minutes, it's execution late. It's unforced turnovers. It's throwing it out of bounds. The infamous, Najee threw the ball to a water bottle on one play, as Graf would say, as a pass. It's just things of that nature, which is why. But again, though, like Najee's not the point guard. To have a guy who got to the league or is playing professional basketball at that position, they have certain traits and characteristics, right? And I mean, you can handle the basketball, you can dribble away from pressure, you can tend to make good decisions. I mean, so we were so excited, and you saw it in game one. You saw it for the first 3 quarters, Jim. And then the injury happened. And then even when he came back from the injury with Dejounte Murray, you saw once he got his legs under him, work with those players, which again, it's one thing to practice with them, it's another to play. You saw what he's capable of doing.
Yeah, I mean, we could sit here for probably the next 2 days going through the list of what-ifs from this season.
There's a lot of what-ifs.
One of the biggest what-ifs that I would have loved to have seen play out is how he would have played if he had continued to be on the court, because it does seem like, and Antonio's going to talk about this a little bit in his segment, that DeJounte's best stretch was the very end. So the few games that he played right before he got hurt in the Boston game, where I think he was hurt in the first quarter or the first half, the games before that was the best that he had looked all season. So we never got to see him. Can he carry this through? Can he continue to build on that over the last few months of the season? Because obviously that was the end of the year for him at that moment.
Well, let's not make our listeners wait any longer. Mr. Antonio Daniels on Dejounte Murray's season now. All right, we bring in Analyst for the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, Mr. Antonio Daniels, to talk about a interesting player this year, AD. First off, thank you for your time. And Look, we were so excited in the offseason. I remember seeing you and Jim and I when we were in Nashville for training camp, and I couldn't wait for practice number 1 on Dejounte Murray. Game number 1, there's Dejounte Murray. Now we see why the Pels really liked him. Oh, no. I mean, that's how I remember Dejounte this season, man. We'll start just with the overall basis. Dejounte Murray, first season as a Pel. How would you describe it?
Disappointing. And I say disappointing not from the fan perspective, but from the player perspective, from Dejounte Murray. Like, he played in 31 games this year. And obviously that's not to his – all that's out of his control. You know, first game of the season, breaking his hand with 2 minutes to go in the game because he made a smart decision to pull the ball back out. And then, you know, as you go a little further into the season, obviously tearing his – rupturing his Achilles. You know, I know the word that he will use is disappointing and frustrating because we know who Dejounte Murray is. We know what he's capable of on both sides of the basketball. And the thing that sucks is in 31 games, and it's not 31 straight games. It's 31 games that are kind of spread out. Mm-hmm. And I felt like right before Dejounte had the season-ending injury, he was starting to get his sea legs under him. I felt like we started to get a sense of, oh, okay, all right, this is what Dejounte Murray was brought in here for, 1. And 2, I felt like Dejounte Murray started to find the balance of, okay, I need to score sometimes. I need to be more aggressive sometimes. I had so many conversations with him throughout the course of this season and telling him, you know what, this is a much better basketball team when you are aggressive to score. If you look at his last 4 games prior to him being injured, right? Not the last game that he actually tore his Achilles. He was averaging 27.5 points, 8.5 assists, and 6.5 rebounds. So he started to figure some things out on the fly. So it's just frustrating and unfortunate and disappointing that the injury occurred when it did.
AD, you touched on some of the things that we're going to get into a little bit later in this episode. But one of the things we've been trying to ask everybody, all the guests that have come on so far, to look back at the season and talk about individual players is just wanted to kind of get a feel for Dejounte as a person in terms of maybe how he approaches the game. I know you know him pretty well from San Antonio, from that background. But, I mean, if you could just go into that before we kind of get into maybe some of the more specific stuff.
That's the part that's disappointing is – I don't feel like the Pelicans fan base got an opportunity to know Dejounte Murray, the person. The person. Like, you can throw the player out the door because, you know, you're only a player for a blessed amount of time, you know, but the person that he is, the leader that he is. Remember, when Dejounte Murray broke his hand, he came back early. He didn't return on his regular timetable. He returned early to try and set a standard and try and show this fan base, look, I'm trying to get back on this floor. I'm trying to show you that I was worth trading for. And just the person, the leader, the father that he is, like, as his career continues to go, I feel like that's the part that will shine more than the player because that ball's going to stop bouncing. It's a matter of time before that ball starts bouncing. But his work ethic, his ability to lead, not just with his words, with his action, is something that will trickle down to everybody in that locker room.
You know, one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on, besides the fact that you know Dejounte pretty well, is obviously you played point guard in the NBA for a long time as well. And one of the things I was curious about when you look back at Dejounte's season, as you mentioned, it was so disjointed. It was hard for him to really get into a groove where he's playing. I mean, even another factor, too, is during the stretch where he was on the court for a while, the teammates around him were changing all the time as well.
Right.
What do you think were some of the biggest factors that went into the fact that if you look maybe at his first, say, 10, 15 games he played, and then the last 15, the difference that we saw in his effectiveness and just his efficiency even too?
Well, I feel like there's context in all numbers. And sometimes it's tough to get the actual context of those numbers because the point that you just brought up, Jim, which is a really good point, is the teammates were constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
The role that you have when Zion is there and when B.I. was there and when Trey Murphy is there and when Herb is there, you know, you go down the list of different guys that are available, it's completely different than the role that you have when Zion's not there and B.I.'s not there. and Trey's not there, and CJ's not there, and Herb is not there. So his role was constantly changing. Sitting down with him at training camp, I remember just having a conversation with him about how he felt playing the point guard position for this team. In his words, not mine verbatim, he said, you know what, this is a point guard's dream, to play with the different offensive options and weapons that he had at that particular time. But little did he know at that particular time that if you remember the first day of training camp, the starting five was Dejounte, CJ, Herb, BI, and Zion. That particular five, that was the starting five to start the season, didn't play 1 minute together in preseason or the regular season. So it's almost like what he saw, he never got an opportunity to see it come to fruition. But he never complained about it. He never griped about it. He just went out and tried to be the best version of himself with who he was on that floor with. And that's all you can ask.
One of the things we're also doing with each of the guests we have is I'm going to give you two numbers, and you can kind of pick whichever one you want to talk about or discuss. If you, maybe we can even talk about both, but here's a couple numbers, stats that are related to Dejounte Murray's season. The first one is in the final 12 games that Dejounte played for the Pelicans, his shooting splits were 44, 36, 81. Before that, it was 37, 25, 84. So you see the big jump. And then the second number is 0, and that is how many times that he had 5 or more turnovers in the last 9 games that he played of the season. He did that 5 times in games before that, where he had, of his first 22 games that he played, there were 5 times where he had 5 or more turnovers. So which of those is the most interesting to you? Yeah.
The turnovers. Because the turnovers make sense. I'm obviously, and Joel will tell you this. Every time I'm handed the stat sheet, the first thing that I look at really at halftime is assist to turnover ratio. And it makes sense to me why the turnovers would improve, because, again, you start to understand your role a little more. And when Dejounte Murray first started, as a point guard position, it's different. It's like being a quarterback. I want to make everybody happy. So sometimes in trying to make everybody happy, I do too much. I'm trying to make sure this guy has enough touches and this guy had. If I'm coming over as a shooting guard, you know what that means? I'm coming over to shoot. If I'm coming over as a defender, I'm coming over to defend. You know what none of those other positions have to do is make sure everybody is happy, is make sure everybody eats. That's the job of a point guard. When you're a point guard in a new situation, a new organization with a new fan base and a new system with a new coach, your job is to want to be liked.
Yeah.
And you know how you're liked? I try and make everybody happy. And sometimes in making everybody happy, he was passing up wide open shots to try and make sure somebody had a chance to eat. So the turnovers initially, I understand. I completely grasp the concept of overturning the ball over initially because you're trying to make everybody happy. But as you get your sea legs under you, as your role becomes a little more defined, now you can understand, okay, everybody's good with me being more offensively aggressive. Everybody's good if occasionally I have a 25-point game or a 20-point game. And I know that if I'm offensively aggressive to score, that makes the game more stress-free around everybody else. So for me, it was more about the ability to adjust on the fly and problem solve as he got games under his belt. And for me, that's the difference in the turnovers initially and the lack of turnovers as the season continued.
Last thing for me on Dejounte, obviously now he's going through rehabilitation from an injury. I don't think you ever had this kind of injury in your career, right? Whether it's conversations that you've had with him or just kind of going forward. I mean, how would you say, what's the way that you approach next season if you're him? Is it you just got to be patient?
You know what, Jim, this is one of those questions where I'm not knowledge to answer. And because I've never been in this position, I've never had an injury that was a 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-month rehab process. I tore my meniscus. I was on the bike the next morning. So I wouldn't feel comfortable telling Dejounte how to approach something that I've never dealt with myself.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
I know for athletes, the tough part is the mental piece. The physical part, your body will recover. It's a given. Your body will recover. God made our bodies to be injured, but he also made them to recover. The recovery part, physically, I feel like is the easy part. The mental recovery is the difficult part. And now I can speak to this experience of tearing a ligament in my finger, of tearing my meniscus, and understanding the mental hurdles that you have to get over to run through that tape. It's not easy because you may have done something your entire life, but doing it now and realizing that, am I strong enough to do the things that I once did before, where you're constantly questioning it? And that's what physical therapy is for. It's the tough part for me. And I'll continue to keep in contact with him throughout this process, just to check on his spirits, see how he's doing, because it's very easy during this time to be out of sight, out of mind, where somebody's no longer playing, so you kind of forget about them and let's move on to the next best thing. And guys still want to feel like they're a part of something, even if physically not. They still want to feel like they're appreciated, like they're missed, like they're wanted, like they're needed.
It's interesting you say that because I go back to how you were just talking about it right now. Right after the injury, I want to say within the week, right? We saw him at the facility out there. And maybe that helps because that's all he knows how to do, right? How to get back to work, rehab. And to your point, whether that doesn't mean running up and down the court, obviously, but it's being around the team. And you just spoke to the mental aspect of it, still going through the daily process of being there with the teammates, being there. So I guess that he's showing us how his rehab is going to go, right? He's just going to do what he's always done.
Yeah, it's tough because the initial rehab, like you're apart from your team. What you're accustomed to this time is leaning on your New Orleans Pelicans family for support. And when you're apart from your team, you know, it's tough. It's tough because when you're isolated, that's a great opportunity for the enemy to attack your thoughts. You know, I'm never going to be the same. I'm never going to get back to who I once was. You know, gosh, I won't be able to play until fill in the blank. And when you're surrounded with your teammates, when you're surrounded with your family, it gives you a different mental outlook, a different mental perspective. And that's why I feel like it's so important. And I love when guys rehab around the team as opposed to rehabbing away kind of by themselves. Because when you're away and you're by yourself and you're isolated, I feel like you're easier to attack mentally. But when you're around the guys and they're jokes and everybody's laughing and it's that family feel, I feel like it's healthier for an athlete and somewhat easier for him to get back to being the best version of himself.
My only thing I got left here, we wrap up with Antonio Daniels as we talk about Dejounte Murray, that season that he just had of learning on the fly, right? Learning his teammates, learning the city, learning that what's continued, right? This week we have Joe Dumars being introduced as the new head of basketball here for the Pelicans. And a guy like that with a player like that, I don't know, how could that relationship, grow?
I mean, I don't know. It's always different when you have someone that's been in your shoes. And the thing that Joe Dumars can relate to is what goes on in between those four lines. And I'm not saying that with respect to David Griffin whatsoever. Not at all. So don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm just talking about the possible relationship between Joe Dumars and Dejounte Murray, or any of the players in that locker room for that matter. Joe Dumars was a high-level guard in the NBA for a long time. And when you're a high-level guard in this league for a long time, sometimes you can see certain things. You can see certain things because you have a trained eye in certain aspects of the game. So it'll be interesting to see the relationship, not just with Joe Dumars and Dejounte Murray, but with Joe Dumars and the entire Pelicans roster because of his history of being in between those four lines.
Yeah,
it's a little more relatable.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some interesting conversations too about the bad boy days, and because he loves to play that tough defense like that too. So that's why I'm kind of interested to see how that goes. Antonio Daniels, thank you so much for your time. Our thanks to Antonio Daniels Jim, always fun when we get a chance to just, hear him break it down from that perspective. Plus, having that relationship with him also helps too, because he understands what they went. And the one thing that really stood out to me in that conversation was the mental aspect to it, which is why I brought up to him seeing him so quickly right after the surgery for the Achilles in the weight area, the weight room. And obviously he can't run and all that, but he's doing other things to be around the team, to still be a leader, to still be vocal, to still be present, I think does help mentally. It's right now, when there's no one sort of around to get that. That's such a tough injury, because one thing, if this happened to you, like it does for me, middle of the night, you stump your toe, and it feels like you're never going to feel it. You're feeling in your foot again, right? You're like, I can't even get to the bathroom. It hurts. I can't imagine an injury, as AD said, that takes 9, 10, 11, 12. I mean, that's a lot happens in that time,
I like the way that Antonio broke down kind of explaining the mental aspect of a lot of different things in our chat with him. I mean, you can kind of picture how difficult it's going to be to go through that, like you said, that long of a process. But I also thought it was really interesting when he talked about, the confidence. He's going to talk about this in the Jose Alvarado one as well on Monday, about Jose's confidence in terms of understanding and making the realization that I am a starting caliber quality player. And for Dejounte, it was really more of what Antonio discussed in terms of the confidence to be like, okay, I don't have to just distribute tonight. They need me to score as well. And so, but it is kind of fascinating to think about that. The point guard position is so much of a mental game. It's so much of a that part is important that for you to figure out. I mean, the physical part of it is crucial as well. And there's so many really good point guards in the NBA and so many quick guys that you need to have the physical ability as well. But I mean, the mental game is such a crucial aspect of that job.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it for sure. One of the things we want to get into here as well, because obviously being in the Western Conference, we focus on that. I've been watching the games, I do. So I love the first round. I really do, because every single night there's at least 2 games, right? And there's 3 on some nights, like earlier this week, Jim. And what I love about it is I'm working, hon. Are you still watching basketball? Pell season? I'm working.
Just grinding. You're grinding the tape. You're watching the film.
I do.
And this is important. These are things that you have to be able to observe. Yeah.
I'm starting to accept that a game can get close and a game can get away from teams, as we've seen the last year or so, Jim, I think because of the 3-point shot, right? There's a couple of series already, and some teams, when they make 23s, they win. When the threes don't go in, you tend to have those things. But am I wrong in thinking the West and East playoff games look different?
No, I think you're right. And I think it's something that a lot of people have commented on already, of like, it feels like, I mean, I heard people say the first few days of the playoffs that the playoffs seem like a different sport than the regular season. And then there's been other commentary lately where it's like the West is a different sport than the East. You're just seeing so much more close competition. And, I mean, for example, in the East, going into the weekend, the New York-Detroit series is the only series that's not 2-0 among those 4 series. Whereas in the West, I mean, Houston-Golden State, Lakers-Wolves, Nuggets-Clippers have all been extremely competitive. And at least in terms of, it's both teams have won a game. I think a lot of that, though, you can chalk up to the depth of the West is so much better. So, it gets kind of thin in the East after you get through the first 5 or 6 teams. I mean, so I think because of that, you're having a lot more first-round series where the 1 versus 8 people are expecting to be a huge rout and no competition, and 2 versus 7, the same thing. I mean, for example, if you think about it this way, the 7th seed in the West is Golden State, which is a team that people think has a chance to compete for a championship maybe if everything breaks right. The 7th seed in the East is Orlando, which, I mean, no disrespect to the Magic, but a lot of people were like, they don't even seem like a playoff team the way that they kind of limped into the postseason.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a drastic difference between 7th seed in the East and 7th seed in the West. I wanted to kind of look this up and go back through some of the numbers as well to figure out, like, all of the evidence tells us that the West is a lot better than the East again this year. But I looked up on Basketball Reference, which is a great site to look up stats. So in the 26 seasons since the 1999-2000 campaign, so basically this century, the East has won the season series against the West 3 times. So you're talking 23 of the last 26 seasons. If you take all the games that were played between the East and the West against each other, the West has won that series all but 3 of them. This season, the West was 249 and 203, which is a 55% winning percentage. I mean, there's been a lot of years where it's been similar to that, where it's like not even close, that the West is so much better than the East. There actually, surprisingly, there was a couple seasons this decade where the East had a slightly better record than the West. And so that represents 2 of the 3 times of the last 26 years that the East has actually been better than the West. But I mean, the entire time I've been here, people have said, for example, maybe they should realign the conferences because it's imbalanced and it would maybe create a better postseason, a better playoffs if instead of having it separated the way it is now. And in my mind, I've always been like, yeah, but you know what? It's gonna. These things go in cycles, and eventually it's going to go back to where. So it's like, do you really want to change the format and then have it go back to where now you're at a disadvantage because you changed the format, and you're not benefiting from, like, okay, say 5 years from now, the East is better than the West. But when is that cycle going to happen? It's like, I can see a lot of people being like, it's just been unbelievable how almost this is my 20th season. 18 of those 20 seasons, the West has been better than the East if you look at it from an objective wins and losses standpoint. So just something to think about in terms of the Pelicans, and also obviously just adds to the challenge of, I think it's a lot easier. We see this with Detroit. It's a lot easier to go from the bottom of the East to now you're a top 6 team than it is in the West. I mean, there's just a lot more upward mobility in the East because there's just not as much depth as there is in the West right now.
All right, just for, bleeps and giggles here as we close out, because it's an interesting conversation. Because I've seen this floated around too, right? You take the top 16 teams, and it's kind of like we talk about record-wise. How do you think that would look? Because it's Oklahoma, Cleveland, Boston, Houston, Knicks. That's your top 5.
Okay.
Lakers, Nuggets, Pacers, Clippers, Wolves. The next 5. Warriors, Grizzlies, Bucks, Pistons, Magic, Hawks. That would be your playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'd see, I mean, there's so many pluses and minuses to that. I mean, I think you'd see even more one-sided first-round series because you'd see the very best team in the league playing against the very worst playoff team. So, like, OKC would be playing the 16th best record right now. So as much damage as they did against Memphis in the first couple games of that series, that would probably be even uglier. So, but I do think, from a practical standpoint, I do think that the problem is I think you'd have to reshape the entire first round format. I think you'd have to go to 2-3-2 series instead of 2-2-1-1-1 in terms of the site of the games
because too much travel.
Because you'd end up with a Portland versus Miami some years. You couldn't do the way that the schedule is now. You couldn't do that. Good if point. You're talking from teams that have to travel 3 time zones. You'd have to set it up the way that they had the finals for a long time, where it was, 2 games for a home team and then the next 3. You might not even get to game 6, so you might have to travel, multiple times. But yeah, I think that's part of it too. And I think also too, if you change the format, it's like there's almost no point of having conferences. So I don't know necessarily if that's a good idea either.
And that's something you've brought up, that you want to make the divisions.
I want to make there to be more things to play for and more things that motivate a team to, okay, we have to win tonight because we have to win the division or we have to win the conferences. We have to improve our seeding. I do think that the play-in has helped a lot in this area because in the recent past, previous decade, if you were the 6th seed or the 7th seed, it was just like, whatever. You might be better off being the 7th seed if you thought the matchup against the 2 was better than the 3. So it was pretty irrelevant in terms of 6-7. Now it's like we saw that Clippers-Warriors game in the last day of the regular season where it felt like the NBA Finals, where they were both trying to make sure that they didn't end in the. So I think that's helped a lot. Yeah. But I do think that going away from eliminating some of the lines that create, whether it's rivalries or reasons why you need to win that game, that's the part that would be a little bit concerning to me, to going to a format where it's just you just throw the top 16 teams into the same bucket and go from there.
Yeah, be fun. Look, can we just agree on this at the very least? Can we just get in the East if you're in New Orleans? Just the Mississippi River is a clear, easy line of to the left is the West, to the right is the East. Right?
They might get that chance when they expand. I mean, there's been so much discussion in the last year or so about expansion, but we still don't really have a definitive timeline for when it's going to happen.
Right.
But
realistically,
it seems like when they expand, most likely they're going to add 2 teams that are going to come into the West.
From the West.
So you're going to need to move one West team into the East. So maybe that'll be New Orleans. I think Minnesota will have a very strong argument because they have so many teams close to them geographically that are in the East, and they have hardly anybody in the West.
Makes sense.
So they probably, from a fairness standpoint, I think they'll be the ones that make the biggest argument. But hey, New Orleans was in the East the first 2 seasons that they were in the city here. So, you could sell the league on the idea of we want to go back to our roots of an Eastern Conference team.
I'm just selfishly in love with the 6:30 tip times. You know what I'm saying? Anytime,
that's true. The 6 o'clocks are nice.
Oh, those are so nice and easy as opposed to the...
That's true, too.
Welcome to Pelicans warm-up. It's 9 p.m. coming up at the bottom of the hour.
I think the fans would appreciate that a lot as well because you would still play West Coast games, but you could basically cut them in half. If you might have 10 games that start after 9 p.m., now you might only have like 4 or 5 in future seasons.
You're a lot more knowledgeable in this. Just 10 seconds. Seattle, Vegas... Are there any cities that would be in the East? Like, would they go back to... Well, Vancouver's West there as well.
Right. No, it seems like those are the 2 teams that...
Really nowhere else
2 cities that everyone talks about the most. I mean,
I know Kansas City would like a team,
right,
but that's in the middle.
Seattle seems like a no-brainer because they have so many things in their favor. They had a historic franchise that was there a long time. They're the biggest market, TV market, population, everything that does not have an NBA franchise. And then with Vegas, obviously, they've added... they're adding other pro sports. Pretty much every sport now is going there.
Baseball,
hockey.
Yep.
So it seems like they're kind of a, I don't want to say no-brainer, but it just seems like that's where the momentum is going. I haven't followed it that closely, but just generally speaking, it seems like those are the 2 teams that would be the likely picks for that.
I know it's not political season. That was last year. But if you want commissioner... Jim Eichenhofer, I'm voting for you. I like it. I think you're very sensical, and more importantly, you can get us to that 6:30 tip time. A vote for Jim is a vote for me.
We need a groundswell. I would be happy with the compensation package as well in that job. So
I just want the free. Every now and then, just send me up to New York, for a little meet and greet. Or
there
something.
You go.
That'd be
there
great. Hey, if you want to hear any more or get more information from Jim, go to Pelicans.com. Each and every one of our player profiles is on there, and it's an accompaniment to obviously what you hear here on the podcast. So in case you missed it, it's 14 total players. Well, Gus, tell me all. No, why don't you go check them out? They're all on there, so if you missed any from earlier this week, they'll be on there. You can check out the ones next week as well, and they're there for eternity, all summer, if you want to go back and read it again.
Thanks for the plug, Gus.
For sure, man. You do a lot of good work, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. On Monday, we'll be talking about Jose Alvarado with Antonio Daniels, and we'll be giving you kind of the rundown of what to expect next week in terms of the 5 players that will be in the season reviews and the podcasts. It's funny, this podcast series and written pieces as well, it's going to lead us almost all the way up into the lottery. So, I mean, we're going to have stuff every day, every weekday for the next several weeks. There will not be a weekday that we don't have something posted leading up to the lottery on May 12th. All
right, you said we're going to come back. Jose's on Monday. 2 Mondays from Jose is the draft lottery.
Right.
It's the 12th.
Yeah, it's coming up quick.
Yeah. This Monday coming up, it's the 28th, then Cinco de Mayo, and then the NBA draft lottery. Thank you, Jim, as always.
Thanks, Gus.
And more importantly, thank you for tuning us in as you've been listening to the New Orleans Pelicans podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans podcast.